They say success leaves clues. But here's the problem: most people aren't studying the clues, they're stealing the costume. They copy the habits, the cars, the routines, the quotes, but they never touch the thinking that built them. And that's why so many end up exhausted, looking successful, but feeling empty inside. Have you ever wondered why two people can read the same book, take the same course, follow the same morning routine, and still end up with completely different results? One rises, the other stays the same. One transforms, the other just imitates. The reason is simple: one is chasing imitation, the other is chasing insight. We live in an age of duplication. Copy this millionaire's morning routine. Wear what they wear, eat what they eat, repeat what they say. But success doesn't come from copying the surface, it comes from decoding the substance. You can borrow someone's method, but not their mindset. You can mimic their schedule, but not their spirit. You see, understanding is where transformation begins. When you understand why they think a certain way, why they act a certain way, you begin to rewire your own philosophy. And that's when success stops being something you chase and starts being something you attract. So today, I want you to stay with me to the very end, because we're going to peel back the layers. I'll show you why copying the successful keeps you broke, how understanding them changes your destiny, and what separates imitators from creators. Once you grasp this, you'll stop being a follower of success and start being a student of it. And that's where your real growth begins. Most people make the mistake of believing that success is something they can borrow, something they can wear like a coat, something they can copy from someone else's morning routine or social media post. They think if they just act like the successful, they'll become successful. They see a millionaire waking up at 5 in the morning, and suddenly they set their alarm for 5 too. They see someone reading for an hour a day, and suddenly they fill their bookshelf with all the same titles. They see someone talk about cold showers, fasting, meditation, and journaling, and they rush to do them all. But without understanding why that person does them, without connecting those habits to a clear philosophy or a burning purpose. And that's why the results don't stick. You see, copying habits without understanding principles creates hollow results. It's like trying to use someone else's map without knowing where you are or where you're going. The map might be perfect, but it's not yours. The truth is, habits are the visible part of success. They're the fruit hanging from the tree. But fruits come from roots. They come from unseen principles, from deep beliefs, from personal philosophy. If you only copy what you can see, you miss what actually gives life to it. When someone disciplined wakes up early, it's not the clock that makes them great. It's the reason they get up. It's the belief that time is precious, that life is short, that they owe something to their potential. When someone reads every day, it's not just for information, it's for transformation. They're feeding their mind because they believe that growth is not an option, it's a duty. When someone saves and invests their money wisely, it's not because they love numbers, it's because they understand the power of freedom and responsibility. You can't get the fruit of a principle if you don't plant the seed of understanding. The problem with imitation is that it makes you feel productive while keeping you shallow. You can feel busy copying the steps, but if you don't understand the philosophy behind those steps, you'll get tired before you get results. You'll say, I've tried everything they do, but it's not working. The truth is, it's not supposed to work, because it's not supposed to be theirs for you to live. You can't microwave someone else's decade of discipline into your week of excitement. The outside looks easy, the inside costs something, and that cost is paid in understanding. Understanding takes time. It takes reflection. It takes sitting with the question, why does this matter? When you read a book, don't just underline the quotes. Stop and ask yourself, what is the principle here? What is this teaching me about life, about decision making, about character? When you hear someone talk about discipline, don't rush to copy their schedule. Try to understand the value system that drives that discipline. Maybe they came from scarcity and learned to value every dollar. Maybe they came from chaos and learned to create structure. Maybe they came from failure and learned to never waste opportunity. When you understand the story behind the action, you stop being a spectator and start being a student. A student doesn't just copy, a student dissects, reflects, and then applies. You learn not to imitate success, but to interpret it. That's the shift. One person copies someone's journal format. Another person learns why journaling matters. That it's not about writing, it's about thinking, clarifying, and evaluating. One person copies someone's diet. Another learns why they eat that way, to sustain energy, focus, and longevity. The first ends up frustrated. The second ends up transformed. Because when you understand the why, you can adapt it to your own how. You see, success is not mechanical, it's philosophical. It's not just what people do, it's what they believe that makes what they do powerful. That's why two people can do the same thing and get completely different outcomes. One is going through the motions, the other is living through meaning. One is acting from imitation, the other from conviction. That's the difference between temporary motivation and lasting transformation. Imagine a man watching a master sculptor carve a beautiful statue. The man is amazed by how effortlessly the sculptor shapes the stone. The next day, he buys a hammer and chisel and begins copying the movements he saw. He strikes the stone the same way, but it doesn't look anything like the sculpture. After a week, he gives up, saying, "I guess I'm not meant for this." What he never realized is that the sculptor's skill didn't come from copying motions. It came from understanding the stone. The sculptor sees what others don't. He understands the pressure, the angles, the texture, the rhythm. That understanding gives power to his actions. The man copied, the master comprehended. And the same is true in life. You can copy a leader's behavior, but not their awareness. You can mimic a successful person's strategy, but not their perspective. Those invisible things, awareness, perspective, philosophy, are what make the visible things work. Without them, the actions are empty. It's like trying to start a fire without heat. You can strike the match all you want, but without fuel, it dies in seconds. Understanding is that fuel. It keeps your effort alive long after imitation would have burned out. Every habit you admire in someone else is supported by an invisible network of beliefs, values, and principles. If you want the results, study that network. Ask yourself, what kind of thinking would produce this kind of behavior? If you admire someone's consistency, study how they think about time. If you admire someone's generosity, study how they think about abundance. If you admire someone's calmness, study how they think about control and surrender. When you study those inner systems, you're no longer copying. You're cultivating wisdom. And wisdom doesn't fade when routines change. When you understand the principle, you can apply it anywhere. If you understand that discipline is built on self-respect, you'll find ways to be disciplined even when life changes. If you understand that wealth is built on value creation, you'll find ways to earn in any economy. Understanding gives you flexibility. Imitation traps you in rigidity. When you copy, you're limited to their environment. When you understand, you can adapt to your own. That's why the great achievers you admire didn't just copy others, they learned from them. They studied their mentors not to become clones, but to extract the essence. They wanted to know how they thought, how they made decisions, how they handled setbacks. They weren't collecting tactics. They were collecting philosophies. Because philosophy is what carries you through when tactics fail. When you understand the principle, you can rebuild the method. But if all you have is the method, when it stops working, you're lost. So before you copy another habit, stop and ask, what is the principle behind this? Why does this work? What belief does this express? What truth does this protect? And how can I make it mine? Once you can answer that, you'll find that your actions carry more weight, your habits carry more meaning, and your growth carries more permanence. Because now you're not chasing results. You're becoming the kind of person who naturally produces them. You're no longer a mimic of success, you're a student of it, shaping your own version from a foundation of understanding. Understanding transforms imitation into innovation. The difference between those who repeat what others have done and those who create something remarkable is simple. One copies the action, the other captures the essence. Every great achiever you admire didn't rise by duplicating someone else's blueprint. They rose by studying it, understanding it, and then building something new from that understanding. Imitation is surface level, understanding is soul level. It's the moment when you stop asking, what are they doing? And start asking, why does it work? That shift changes everything. You see, imitation is easy because it doesn't require thought. You just look, copy, and perform. It makes you feel like you're moving, but you're only rehearsing someone else's lines in a play they wrote for themselves. Understanding, on the other hand, forces you to think. It invites you to dig beneath the surface, to study not just the what, but the why and the how. It's uncomfortable because it demands curiosity, reflection, and patience. Things imitation can't offer. But the reward of understanding is freedom. The freedom to take wisdom from others and express it through your own life, your own voice, your own path. Every innovator began as a student. They watched, they listened, they learned. But they didn't stop there. They looked for patterns, principles, and meanings behind what they observed. They asked better questions. They experimented, failed, adjusted, and then created something uniquely their own. They didn't just copy a successful person's strategy. They studied the mindset that made that strategy possible. Because once you understand the thinking that built the structure, you can build your own structures, stronger ones, better suited to your purpose and your time. Think of a musician. Anyone can play someone else's song. With practice, they might even sound identical, but that doesn't make them a composer. The composer understands music itself, rhythm, tone, emotion, structure. They can create something new because they understand what gives a song life. That's what understanding does in any field. It moves you from performer to creator, from copycat to originator. You no longer rely on someone else's melody, you write your own. Understanding is what allows you to take principles across fields. You can study how an athlete trains and apply that discipline to business. You can study how a teacher communicates and apply that clarity to leadership. You can study how a gardener nurtures growth and apply that patience to relationships. The power is not in the specific practice. It's in the principle that drives it. Copying keeps you locked in one dimension. Understanding lets you see the pattern that works everywhere. And here's the secret. When you understand deeply, you don't just become successful, you become adaptable because life changes, markets shift, opportunities evolve. The exact routines that made someone successful 5 years ago may not work today, but principles never expire. Understanding lets you carry timeless wisdom into a changing world. You don't panic when methods fail because you know the meaning behind the method. You don't cling to formulas because you've learned how to create new ones. Imitation makes you dependent. You wait for someone to show you the next move. Understanding makes you independent. You can see for yourself what needs to be done. When you copy, you need a teacher for every step. When you understand, you become your own teacher. And that's the moment you begin to lead. You can't lead by copying, you lead by seeing what others don't see. That vision comes from understanding. Many people look at success stories and try to reverse engineer them. They read a book or watch an interview and try to replicate the steps. But steps alone are meaningless without context. You might copy how someone marketed their business, but not understand the emotion behind their audience. You might copy their words, but not their intention. You might copy their product, but not their philosophy. And so the result falls flat. Success built on imitation is fragile. It breaks when conditions change. But success built on understanding is resilient because it's rooted in principles, not personality. If you study the most remarkable people throughout history, you'll notice they all had mentors, but none became replicas. They learned deeply, but they applied uniquely. The student who copies remains a shadow. The student who understands becomes light. Understanding gives birth to originality. It allows you to take what you've learned and express it in a way no one else can. It's what turns a borrowed idea into a breakthrough. When you understand, you start to connect dots others don't see. You see relationships between ideas, industries, and experiences. You can pull wisdom from one place and use it somewhere completely different. You stop living in imitation because imitation limits you to one source. Understanding opens the entire world as your classroom. Suddenly, every mistake teaches you, every conversation instructs you, every observation refines you. You don't wait for inspiration. You create it through comprehension. Imagine two builders standing on the same lot with the same materials. One looks at the blueprints and follows them perfectly, but never asks why each beam or wall is placed where it is. The other studies the blueprints, understands the logic, and learns the purpose behind every design choice. When a storm comes and the first structure starts to crack, the copycat builder is lost. The other builder knows exactly what to reinforce and how to rebuild because he understands the principle of construction, not just the picture of it. That's what happens in life. Storms reveal the difference between those who copied and those who comprehended. Understanding makes you creative because it invites interpretation. When you grasp the essence of something, you can reshape it without losing its truth. You can modernize an old idea, reframe a timeless truth, or innovate a better way, all without breaking the principle. That's how progress happens. Someone understands the principle, honors it, and expresses it differently. Every evolution in art, science, business, or personal growth starts with someone who understood more than they imitated. The world doesn't need more copies. It needs more understanding minds. People who can study greatness, not to worship it, but to interpret it. People who can take what they've learned and translate it into something that fits their own story. That's how you create impact that lasts. Because imitation produces repetition, but understanding produces evolution. Repetition keeps things alive for a season, evolution keeps them alive for generations. If you think about it, everything you admire in successful people was once someone else's idea, reimagined, reinterpreted, and refined. The innovators you see today studied those before them, but they didn't stop at admiration. They asked questions others didn't ask. They looked for patterns others ignored. They learned principles others overlooked. And from that, they built something distinct. They didn't want to be their heroes. They wanted to understand them enough to build upon their foundation. That's what separates those who stay behind from those who move humanity forward. Understanding isn't glamorous. It takes time. It requires silence, humility, and curiosity. It asks you to think deeply instead of rushing quickly. It demands that you question assumptions and challenge appearances. But it's worth it, because the person who understands doesn't just follow success. They shape it. They don't chase trends. They create direction. They don't mimic excellence. They multiply it. And that's the true reward of understanding. It turns borrowed wisdom into original power. The goal is not to become them, but to become more of you. Somewhere along the road to success, people forget that the purpose of learning from others is not imitation, but transformation. They look at someone they admire and think, if I could just live like them, talk like them, work like them, then maybe I'll be great too. But that mindset leads to losing yourself in the pursuit of someone else's reflection. Success was never meant to erase your identity. It was meant to refine it. The goal is not to fit into someone else's mold, but to discover what's already inside you and build it into something exceptional. Every person you admire has one thing in common. They became fully themselves. They stopped chasing other people's paths and started walking their own. They might have borrowed ideas, learned lessons, or taken inspiration, but at the end of the day, they filtered everything through their own experience, values, and personality. They learned from others not to duplicate, but to differentiate. That's the essence of authenticity. It's when what you learn on the outside harmonizes with who you are on the inside. When that happens, your growth becomes natural instead of forced, and your success becomes an expression of your truth, rather than an imitation of someone else's. The tragedy of imitation is that it robs you of your own potential. You spend your life trying to fit into shoes that were never made for you. You chase someone else's dream, someone else's timing, someone else's purpose. And even if you reach their level, you'll never feel fulfilled because deep down you know it's not your victory. You're living as an actor in another person's story. The applause might sound nice, but it doesn't echo in your soul. That's why so many people achieve outward success and still feel inwardly empty. They've built a life that looks right, but doesn't feel right. You can admire someone's courage without copying their character. You can respect their journey without duplicating their direction. Understanding should lead you back to yourself. It should make you ask, what does this mean for me? How does this apply to my life, my values, my calling? The answers to those questions don't make you more like them. They make you more like you. That's the real prize of personal growth. You don't become a clone, you become clear. You begin to uncover what's unique about you, what strengths you carry, what voice you have, and how your perspective can add value to the world. When you stop trying to become them, you start to see that what you've been given is enough to build something great. You start respecting your own journey. You stop comparing your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. You stop judging your process by someone else's progress. You begin to realize that your timing, your background, your story, they're not limitations, they're your raw material. The gold is not in becoming like others, but in refining who you already are. Understanding successful people isn't about cloning their identity. It's about learning the universal truths behind their success. Truths like discipline, gratitude, patience, and purpose. Principles that anyone can apply in their own way. Discipline for one person might look like building a company. For another, it might mean rebuilding their health. Gratitude for one person might mean writing in a journal. For another, it might mean spending time with family. The principle is the same, but the expression is different. You must find the expression that fits you, because that's where your power lies. When you understand others deeply, you begin to notice what aligns with you and what doesn't. You start filtering, not just absorbing. You take what resonates and you leave what doesn't serve you. That's maturity, the ability to learn from everyone without losing yourself. You can be inspired by one person's confidence, another's humility, another's focus, but still stand firm in your own essence. You don't have to copy their walk to move in their wisdom. You can carry their lessons in your heart while keeping your own footprints on the ground. The world doesn't reward imitation for long. People may notice you when you sound or act like someone famous, but they only remember you when you bring something new. Every generation remembers those who added their voice, not those who echoed others. The greatest respect you can give your mentors and heroes is not to become their duplicate, but to become their continuation, to take what they taught you and expand it through your own experience. That's how progress happens. Every original thinker was once a student, but they honored their teachers by surpassing imitation and moving into creation. Becoming more of yourself is not about rejecting influence. It's about integrating. You learn from the best so you can bring out the best in you. You study the principles so you can write your own story with them. You take what you've learned and shape it around your own personality, values, and environment. You blend wisdom with authenticity. That's when your work stops being a copy and starts being a contribution, because the world doesn't need another version of someone else. It needs the fullest version of you. You are designed differently for a reason. Your mind, your perspective, your pain, your dreams. They all form a pattern that no one else can duplicate. When you try to be someone else, you dilute your difference, and your difference is your destiny. You don't have to run faster than someone else. You have to run in your lane. You don't have to speak louder than others. You have to speak in your own voice. That's the beauty of self-understanding. It frees you from the exhausting race of comparison. True success is alignment. When your actions, beliefs, and identity move in the same direction. When you admire someone else, let it awaken that alignment within you. Let their story remind you of what's possible, not what you lack. Let their success inspire you to explore your own capacity. Understanding them should expand your faith in yourself, not shrink it. When you understand deeply, you stop saying, "I want to be like them," and start saying, "I want to learn from them so I can become more of me." Every great teacher, every mentor, every success story carries a hidden message. Find your way. They're not inviting you to worship their path. They're showing you what's possible when a human being commits to their truth. When you understand that, admiration turns into motivation, and motivation turns into mastery. You stop copying routines and start cultivating principles. You stop imitating tone and start finding your own rhythm. You stop wearing borrowed confidence and start building real conviction. Becoming more of yourself doesn't mean you ignore the wisdom of others. It means you let it shape you, not replace you. You let it refine your decisions, guide your thinking, and elevate your standard. But you still walk your own road. You learn from others to build a better version of you, not a mirror of them. And that's what makes your success authentic. It's not borrowed, not forced, not staged. It's born from your own growth, your own understanding, your own truth. You don't have to compete with others when you understand who you are. You realize there's enough room for everyone at the top because everyone's mountain is different. You stop measuring your worth by someone else's timeline. You stop chasing their definition of success and start defining your own. You stop asking, "How can I be like them?" and start asking, "What can I become with what I've been given?" And that question, when answered with honesty and courage, will lead you to the kind of fulfillment that imitation could never give. The purpose of understanding the greats is not to lose yourself in their shadow, but to light your own path with their wisdom. Their stories are guides, not goals. Their lessons are tools, not templates. Their achievements are proof that it's possible, not pressure for you to copy. Once you truly understand that, you no longer need to compete or compare. You stand tall in your own identity, you honor your own growth, and you build a life that looks like you. A life that feels like purpose, not performance.